Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, my guest is Callum MacPherson. He is the 2022 South Australian Young Achiever Award recipient. He is also the founder and host of Youngblood Men's Mental Health Video Podcast. He is a journalist by degree. He spans experience working for Channel 7 News, working in Queensland and South Australia, covering stories and interviews with many Australian household names. After losing his friend James to suicide in 2019, Callum was inspired to create a public platform via a video podcast to share the struggles, emotions, and life lessons of primarily young men under aged 40 in hopes to share inspiration, tools, and strategies so we can all come together as a community and understand that there is a way for it to get better and to promote men's mental health. He has hosted over 170 long-form interviews of this kind and very recently interviewing the stories of other family members, mothers, sisters, daughters, partners, and talking to professional experts in this field, specifically in men's health, men's mental health. I was honored to sit down with Callum today and talk to his experiences working in this field. He has 5 years experience in this video podcast world, and he does an excellent job in bringing out the stories of these young men whilst playing his role as a professional journalist in bringing out the life lessons, to bring out the positivity and the arc that we can learn from each and every story. We do go into some murkier grounds. My curiosity leads to ask him, are we over-prescribing therapy? Are we talking about it too much? Are we swinging the pendulum in the other direction? I ask him his thoughts on life coaches, gurus, and the potential harms or positivity in that space. We talk about very specific conversational scripts, themes that we can do to help one another when we are helping other men, but it is not bound by gender in how we conduct conversations, in what we can ask people, things we can do to support one another. We also talk about how to help ourselves when we are the helper, when we do step into a role of helping someone else. What can we do to help ourselves to manage, assist that situation? That is a very critical piece hit there that I learned a lot from too. We do talk about general health, fitness, mental health, conversations, just being the young guys that we are. But all in all, this is a fantastic podcast. It was extremely informative. And we also go into some grounds that I think you might find interesting as well. So without further ado, as I have wobbled on, Callum MacPherson, wow, this is a great interview. Please stick around. Thanks, bro. We made it. Callum MacPherson, the Global Podcast. What's going on?
Thanks for having me, man. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
That's it.
On your podcasting journey.
That's it. Well, you're only 190 plus episodes in front of me. How many podcasts have you done?
Something like that. You sort of lose count after a while.
Because you didn't have the pre-title. Like I was sitting through Spotify and I was counting them.
Oh, you were scrolling?
Yeah. And then I went on YouTube and it's like 195 podcasts. I'm like, fuck.
Some of them are like extra clips and that sort of thing. But I think it's something like 165, 170 like full length, hour-long episodes.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Who's Youngblood? What is the Youngblood podcast?
So Youngblood Men's Mental Health is a show dedicated to young men's mental health. So it's about sharing the lived experience stories of young guys under 40, but also their loved ones. So that's been a bit of a recent development is I'm starting to have women on the show now as well. So sisters, mothers, daughters of men who've lost their lives to suicide or have struggled a lot with their mental health. So that's a way of broadening out the show. I've always wanted to do that, but I haven't ever had the ladies come forward wanting to share their stories. But now that I've started doing that, that's starting to happen more. So I'm excited about that. But the show's always for young men primarily, and just about all of those 160 or whatever episodes are guys under 40 from around Australia talking about what they've been through, coming from all sorts of different backgrounds and demographics and life experiences. And I think talking about mental health is just a way of talking about being human, really, because it's everything that sits under the umbrella of having to go through life and survive it and work it all out. And it's about helping each other to figure it out as we go along, and also to break down the stigma and let blokes in particular know that just because you're struggling with this or that, it doesn't make you stand out or a freak or someone who's weak or different to anyone else, and that actually we all go through stuff at certain times. And not only should you not feel ashamed about it, but you should front up to it and take action to try to improve the state of your life and for those who care about you. And it's about bringing people together, but then also giving people tools to be able to put themselves in a better position. But it's not particularly confronting. It's that sort of first step, planting the seed. It's how I like to think about it. It's not as confronting as going to the doctor or going to a psychologist. You can start off by just listening to other people's stories and figure out that, oh, it's actually not just me who's gone through this, and then hear, oh, that worked for that guy. Maybe I'll try that. So it can be that simple. And yeah, it's been going for nearly 5 years now, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, and then I've got like so many questions on stories and stuff, but just a little bit of a pre-context of potentially where your career has been prior to this. You didn't just decide to start a mental health podcast. Maybe start from your journalistic career, from where you started, what that career was like, and ultimately what shifted you to want to
Yeah.
put all this effort and energy into this
Yeah,
podcast.
so I did journalism at uni, and that was a course that wasn't all that helpful at preparing you to be a journalist, to be honest. I think there's quite a few university courses like that where it's not like engineering or teaching or doing medicine, where you need to be fully prepared to enter the industry before you do it. So there was a lot of essay writing and things that aren't all that relevant, because when you're working in journalism, and I was in TV for 4 years, you have to do at least one story, if not multiple stories a day, and you have to pump that out and make it work, and come hell or high water, find a way to make that story happen. There's no, the news must go on. Like, there's no failing in that context. And yeah, when I was learning, it was like, oh, you could do like one story a semester or whatever. So, and you knew me back then. I spent a fair bit of time enjoying myself on the weekends, and I probably put in a solid day of work at uni probably every 2 weeks to get my assignments done. But most of my learning was actually working as a volunteer at Fresh 927, the radio station, throughout my degree, and getting up a couple mornings a week and doing the news while my voice was still breaking. And got the chance to do my own stories on Adelaide then as well, for a show called Wavelength, where I could do stories on anything that I was interested in. And I think that's what awoke the actual passion in me, because I've had writing and communicating skills from school. I was terrible at maths and science. Both parents are English teachers. I was doomed to either be a teacher or something else to do with language and communication. And I actually did law first year, and that wasn't for me either. I was like falling asleep in 3-hour property lectures, and there were other people there who were super into it and talking about how they were so excited about law. And I was like, I just could not care less, because I was one of those classic kids coming out of school just did a right with an ATAR and just did what people say you should do, which is go do law or something that sounds impressive, but didn't actually know what I wanted to do with my life. Don't know how you're supposed to know what you want to do when you're 18.
18, yeah.
Anyway. So it was working at a radio station doing those stories that I started to actually enjoy storytelling, when I had the creativity and the freedom to interview people that I was interested in. And that was actually a lot more like podcasting than the news career that followed. I ended up going to Port Lincoln for my first job ever, and I was a video journalist. So I moved out of home for the first time, moved to a new city for the first time, and started a career all at once. And I was a one-man news team, so I used to go around town, had to do 2 stories a day, and I had to set up the camera, film myself, report myself, people driving past beeping at me while I was like talking to myself, because I was the only dude in the town wearing a suit. Then I'd have to edit it and get it all uploaded, and it was just do or die every day. It was like a really full on. And then I went to Townsville in far north Queensland and worked for 7 years up there. And that was tough, but it was a bit better because I had some colleagues. Port Lincoln drove me insane because I was just isolated just by myself. It was me and 4 computer screens, and I didn't know anyone there either. And I'd have to do heaps of work after work just to have enough content for the next day, because you can imagine in a town of 15,000 people, there's not really 2 news stories a day worth of stuff. So
Yeah. It's like a FIFO lifestyle, but not FIFO.
Pretty
You're
much.
just stuck in a remote location.
Yeah, and Port Lincoln was the nicest of the regions, but I'm a city boy, and I was coming straight off of spending my Saturdays at HQ and spending my rest of the time at the gym and being looked after by mum and dad. So it was a bit of a rude awakening, but it was a sink or swim moment, and that was the push I needed, I think, to get going. Because before that, I'd finished my degree and I was like, I'm just going to be a bartender. I'm just going to go to Europe and be a bartender and just ignore my degree. I was pretty into partying and I was having a fun time working the bar. So you can imagine Dad was not all that keen on that idea. And then I ended up doing an internship, and then through that got a job because someone quit. And then before you know it, I had my career and the car was packed, and I did the full driving off and mum and dad are crying thing, like in the beaten up old blue Lancer. And then so I ended up in Townsville, and that was a pretty bizarre experience interviewing Bob Catter, Pauline Hanson, these kinds of characters. The whole place couldn't be more different from Adelaide. But yeah, I had a little team of people similar age to me, so it was actually a really good time to be there. But really intense. It's a brutal industry. Obviously, industry not doing great now. It was even worse it's worse now, but it was tough 5 years ago in terms of not many resources, expecting a lot out of people for not much money. So getting paid for 7 hours a day, but doing 10 every day and just getting flogged. But because you were starting out in your career and you just wanted to prove yourself and prove that you could do the job, it was all right while it lasted. Anyway, so that was an experience living in Townsville. And then I came back to Adelaide and I did 2 years for 7 News here. And that was mostly overnight crime stuff. So I was a casual here, and that meant I worked all weekend, every weekend. So I didn't really have much of a lifestyle, and I'd be up every day at 5 a.m. to go out to Manapara or Smithfield or wherever someone had been grievously harmed.
Yeah,
the night
that was
before.
one of the things I really want to get into, like in retrospect, and then what was the mental toll having to go through these grievance stories, and basically it seems to be forcing emotion out of these people in like the hardest time of their life.
Yeah.
I mean, what was it like at the beginning? Like, was that strange, weird, and what toll did it have on you?
Yeah, it was subtle. It's kind of like being in the emergency services, except you're not helping anyone most of the time. So it's a weird one. I think when I first started out, I was so eager to prove to myself and to the newsroom that I could do the job that I was just focused on that. And as I got more comfortable and confident that I could do it, I started to think more about, should I be doing it? How much good is it actually doing? And being around people on the worst day of their life every day is a strange thing, to see people in distress with horrible stuff happening. And, I did a lot of house fires, armed robberies, stabbings, shootings, fatal car accidents was the worst. People who are just having a shit time, and your job would be to rock up there and make a story out of it. And then there's also a level of competition, particularly in the metro cities between Channel 7, who I worked for, and Channel 9 and 10 and etc. So you had to try and get this result. And if you didn't and the other team did, then you'd be in trouble back at the office. So that was the sort of the attitude. So there was a need to compete for content and to make things happen. But then that's juxtaposed with these are people's lives and people who are really upset and having a rough time, and maybe the story actually isn't going to do them that much good. I think news is important. We can all agree that we need to be informed about what's going on in the world and in our community. But with commercial TV in particular, there's quite a blending between facts and entertainment, and sort of playing on the way we're wired, which is to focus on the negative and focus on the threat and the stuff that might get us and play on that for clicks and likes and views and that sort of thing. So I ended up reporting in that job a lot of stuff that felt more like gossip or things that perhaps people didn't really need to know, but we needed to fill the time in the bulletin that day. So you'd have to get a story up, and that meant knocking on people's doors until someone would give you a usable grab about what they did or didn't hear or did or didn't see the night before, and you'd weave it into a story. So those ones would be all right, but sort of forgettable. And then there was some really tough times, like you'd go to a fatal accident where a young person had just died, and it would be your job to figure out who they are, who their family is, where they live, go to that house on that day, like a few hours later, have people inside the house clearly grieving and yelling and wailing, and then knock on the door and say, do you want to talk about the person who's just died? And be told in no uncertain terms to get off their lawn.
Yeah.
And then at times be told to go back there and knock again. And as a junior reporter who isn't the one making the call and has to do what they're told, that's quite confronting. And I think because I was really young and I was a go-getter, I didn't think about it as much in the beginning. But I'm also an empathetic person and compassionate person, and I don't like being around people no one does if they're really, really upset, and you certainly don't want to feel like you're adding to it. So yeah, they were confronting scenarios at times, being around people who are on drugs, who were hurt or who had just lost someone and were in shock, and then you have to try and get a comment out of them. That's a pretty full-on thing to normalize. So yeah, that was a big reason in the end why I didn't want to keep doing it, because it did start to subtly change who I was as a person. There's also, it's quite a politically charged environment. It's very intense. It's like if something's falling through, then you can't just say, oh, well, we couldn't do it today. Like, you've got to make it happen, and you've got people relying on you, and there's lots of distraction and noise, and you've got to do things very fast, and you could be sent away somewhere at any moment. And then you're surrounded by nasty stuff happening. So it started to make me quite an anxious person and a bit bitter as well, like a bit cynical, which is not naturally the kind of person that I am. But there was quite a bit of negativity involved around it. And yeah, that was a big part of why I didn't want to stay at it. The people who do stick with it and do a really good job, they just fully believe in it. Like they thrive in the competition aspect. They take a lot of pride in it, and done the right way, I think you can. I don't think it's like a disgraceful industry or anything like that, but it just wasn't for me. But I did develop some really important skills, and one that I'm sure you hear about in the books you read and the podcasts you listen to was just getting used to getting rejected, man. Like that's such a good skill. You often hear about it in the sales context where some guru will say, oh, we'll go and knock on 10,000 doors and get knocked back that many times and have a thick skin, and that'll help you to go out and achieve whatever you want to achieve. And I certainly experienced that, because 70% of the doors I knocked on, I'd get told to no or fuck off.
Yeah.
And so doing that for years meant that I didn't really have any qualms with having a crack at stuff or going up and talking to someone, because I had just done it so much. So that repetition was really useful. And also knowing that things aren't just going to work out, they're not just going to come off. And when it doesn't work out straight away, that's all right. Just brush it off. It's nothing personal. Just keep going. So I think it did embed that attitude within me, which has been helpful for my entrepreneurial pursuits, and I think just my life in general, not expecting that it's just going to work out and you're not going to have to go and knock on doors and hustle and work for it. And I think if you don't have those kinds of experiences, depending on how you've been raised, you can have that sort of air of entitlement of, oh, if I try first time and it doesn't work out, it must mean that I'm not good enough, or that what I'm doing isn't of value, or be totally shattered when someone says no to you. So I think that was a real benefit. But I haven't missed it for a day since I stopped doing it 4 and a bit years ago. There's never been a time where I missed being out there, because it was hectic and it wasn't all that nice.
Yeah, like you developed. See, it sounds like you've developed a skill set of talking to these people. What's the difference now? The stories that you have men and now women share on your podcast. It's not necessarily the worst day of their lives, but often they're retelling some of the worst days or
Yeah.
periods of their life. How have you changed from listening to those stories? Because there seems to be a similarity, but the difference is, I guess, the arc of where you want to get to
That's right.
is it's expressing tools, resources. It's the stories. There's a positive
Yeah, that's
end
right.
amongst some pretty grave stories. So what's ultimately that difference now?
Well, I
How
think
you hold
the
that?
difference is time between stories. When you're talking about the news, it's today, here's the trauma right now, versus the podcast is at least months, often years later, and it's about reflection and it's about taking the positive out of it, and it's often a redemption story. And you're right, the show always aims to be inspiring and end on a positive note. I don't have people on if I feel like I can't finish the episode on that positive note. And it's also, that's balanced with, we're not saying, oh, it's the classic hero's journey and I went through something bad and then I slayed the dragon and then I rode off into the sunset and now it's all good. Because part of the mental health story is that, we learn to manage and live with our scars and our illnesses and our struggles, and they become part of us, and there's no shame in that. But it's not like, oh, you're just cured and then you're all good and then you talk about how it's all good now. But people are in a much better place where they're able to rationally look at what happened and talk about what worked for them and speak about what might work for others and why they're optimistic, why they're hopeful, what they're living for now. So that's very much the upward trajectory that we like to end on, but with the fact that life's a journey, and even if feel like you're in a good place now, being humbled by the experiences of life that you could easily end up back where you've been or somewhere negative that you haven't been before, because we're fragile as human beings, and there's a lot of ducks that we have to have in a row without being paranoid. So yeah, the show always needs to be positive, real and authentic, but positive. We want people to listen and feel like, one, I'm not alone, but two, things can get better. And often people are telling their stories where they've been at the lowest of low and they've been at rock bottoms that they thought they'd never come back from. And in a fairly short amount of time, they do come back and they achieve things they never thought they would. So nothing can really be more inspiring than that. I think if you're listening, you can relate to someone and you can think, man, I couldn't feel worse than this and I'm a lost cause. And you hear some of these stories and you go like, oh, he had it worse than me, or that's something similar to what I've felt, and how did he navigate that? So I think that's the value in the show. And then a podcast is like an actual conversation. A news story is 80 seconds. Yeah,
Diced and spliced.
Yeah, that's right. And you can rock up and report on this happened on this day, but there's no follow up, or there's no real depth to that. There's not enough time to tell people stories. I think the beauty of podcasts is you allow people the space to actually say what they think and explain themselves. And you can find out who that person actually is, because you can't script an hour or however long it is. So there's a beauty in that, and giving people that space to be able to share those stories. And I think the reason that I feel so privileged to do my show is that all these people come on and for free they share their stories and they trust me to help them share that. And they're doing it for the greater good, just because they know it was so significant to their lives and they want to try and use that to be a positive to help someone else. And I think there's a lot of beauty in that. I think actually most human beings are like that. Like we're communal creatures and we're about looking after each other and our fellow man. And so it's a real strong example of that, which I'm always humbled to be a part of, helping to share. I think there's real power in that, especially these days where we're so much more isolated than before. And although we're more connected than ever, and in lots of ways we're not. And sometimes it can feel like there's a bit of a, look after yourself and your family type attitude, which of course you need to do. But through podcasting, just creating that kind of community feeling where you can see hundreds of other stories of people like yours, and they're coming onto a show to share that just to maybe help you. I think it's a beautiful thing. But yeah, the reason I got into it in the first place was losing a mate of mine to suicide at the end of, at the start of 2019, and wanting to use my skills and my passion for storytelling to tell stories that I felt mattered more and that were more significant, and primarily gave space to young men to talk about things that they were going through, because I was acutely aware that there are so many men struggling with whatever it might be and putting on a front, and they don't have platforms to go and talk about it. And when I was grieving and I was looking for people to relate to, going on YouTube, typing in, people bereaved by suicide or suicide story or mental health struggle, or I couldn't find any young guys talking about their experiences. So I thought I should start a platform where we do that, and didn't think about it too much more than that. Just kept going and learned as I went along, and have been overwhelmed with how many dudes are keen to come on and share their story. And like, there actually are so many men who do want to talk once you give them the platform, and just seeing the reception to that, and how it's basically nothing but love for the people who come forward and tell those stories. And you find out that in your head you might think, oh, this is so embarrassing, people are going to judge me or pass me away if they ever knew this. And then when people come out and tell them, they just get embraced, which is amazing.
Yeah, I was going to ask the question, but I think you've answered it. Is after thousands of hours of this work, what do you think men are craving, subconsciously or not, in this space?
Well, I think just the opportunity to embrace what they've been through, embrace the struggle or the pain or the awkwardness or the uncomfortable feeling in life circumstances that they've been through, and to be able to, rather than run from that or put it into your closet or put it under the rug, but be able to actually utilize that for something and feel empowered by it and use it to help someone else who might be in the midst of that right now. I think, yeah, there's a lot of strength to be found in that. And there's a lot of people out there who are really eager to help each other. And it's also just cathartic as well. When you share your story, often people haven't shared it at length in that sort of a way before, and will feel like it's a healing thing. It's like closing a chapter. Like, it's an important way to get closure over your life so far and these really intense things happening, and being able to put it into words in a way that you can proudly put out there that's going to help someone else. I think there's a lot to that. I think, yeah, also men are craving direction, I think. I mean, obviously we're speaking generally, but our society's been changing a lot in recent decades, and with the rise of feminism, and we don't need to tell everyone because people know what I'm talking about, and I'm certainly not about to Andrew Tate or anything like that.
I was going to say that's the polar. That's the anti-effect of
Yeah.
feminism.
But I don't think that women being empowered has to come at the cost of men being disempowered. I think we can both rise, but it's hard to ignore that men have copped a lot of flack, it seems, especially on social media in the last decade, 5 years, and even prior to that, in terms of examples on TV shows and sort of how the everyday man is portrayed. And that, combined with expectations of men and the family dynamics, nuclear family option changing, and women in the workplace, and things have changed quite a bit in society. And then there's the narrative put onto young men of with all the massive scourge we have in this country of domestic violence at the moment, which is like a massive problem. But how do we have that conversation with men when men need to drive that change without demonizing young boys who haven't done anything yet, and making them feel like they're a loaded gun just because they're a man? And we've got to do it without saying to boys and men, like, you're a problem just because you're a man. I think we've got to embrace the beautiful parts of being a male and being masculine, however you define that, and not try and do away with that or make men into women, but embrace those strong character traits that we've always looked for. But then my show, and I think this cultural movement around men's mental health at the moment, is also infusing that with the capacity to have the emotion and the vulnerability and the honesty there, just so we can chip away at the surface and get to what's underneath and actually communicate. I think so we can connect, so men and women can connect, men can connect with men in a different way that's more constructive. And I think the selling point for that for men is you're going to be a better partner, a better father, a better son, a better brother, a better community member, a stronger, more effective man, if you're able to be brave enough to have that self-awareness and come forward whenever stuff's actually a bit too much and you need a hand, and actually confront that rather than just reaching for the bottle or lashing out or lying to yourself and saying that whatever vice you're using to distract yourself from the problem isn't a problem. If you're brave and strong enough to be able to face up to that stuff, you're going to be the man that I think most of us want to be, which is that protector, provider. And there's nothing wrong with wanting that. And that's an important role for us to play. And doesn't mean women can't play it as well. But yeah, I think it's how do we evolve that archetype where we keep some of the great stuff, and we can infuse it with some of the more sensitive stuff, I guess you could call it, just so we're a bit more well-rounded and men feel like they can be all of those things. So you don't have to be just the definition of stoic and cold and calculated and strong and closed off, or a puddle on the floor. You can be all of it. Yeah.
Circling back to the point of teenagers and the young boys who haven't quite gotten into full adolescence and that blame game, like you said, just because you're a man, you're X. And seeing as you did mention him and you talk to high schoolers, the Tate phenomenon, that is the polar opposite. He's an anti-woke, anti-left wrecking ball. And although you and I can sit here in our very mature 30, 31 years old, we can separate the meme from the persona. Teenagers often can't. Have you had any striking experiences where it's like, yeah, fuck, like these people are listening to this person, and of many like that, but they're taking things quite literal and they're getting ramped up and it's enticing. You get sucked into this hole, and it's providing a voice for that.
Yeah.
Like, have you come across things where?
Well, I'm not a teacher. I do occasionally do a bit of stuff in schools. I haven't done in the wellbeing space for a while, but I know that it's like a massive issue for schools, is having all the lads on TikTok and then being disrespectful to their particularly female teachers, and referencing those influences as the reason why. And yeah, you can see why though. You can see why it's appetizing and appealing when it's, I think teenage boys respond to a character like Andrew Tate because he's giving them a clear blueprint of, if you do this, you'll get this, you do this, get this, this is the truth, right? Which is a pretty basic black and white, doesn't have any nuance to it. But I think boys like the feeling of direction that comes out of that, and they like the personal responsibility element, which I don't dislike. I think we are ultimately all responsible for ourselves. And you need to be the one who is accountable. And if things aren't going how you would like them to go, then there's probably things that you can change to improve that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that principle. But there isn't really any nuance in those when you're watching a 30-second clip of someone yelling at you or talking about soy boys or whatever it might be. You can take that message into your head, but it's not really sparking a discussion where there's other voices or there's all that much context. So yeah, it's kind of limited in what you can get out of it. I think in terms of what we do about that as a society, when you're not going to stop the content, like it's out there and those characters get all those views and all that engagement. But we know that it's people on the extreme ends who get all the traffic, because most of us who are sort of more moderate and in the middle, if we're to make content, it's not going to stand out as much. The algorithm likes outrage, and so you're going to get a lot of extreme right, extreme left, and whatever person's saying the most outrageous thing is what we're going to see the most of. So I think most people know that that's not like normal life, hopefully. But yeah, in terms of what we actually do about that, when we're speaking to young men in particular and as a society, I think it comes down to priorities and values. Like, what are your values and what do you think is important? So for you to be fired up by someone like Tate and to think like, oh yeah, this is the guy I want to follow, or anyone speaking this language is what I'm about, you need to believe that the most important thing in life is money, is having Bugattis, it's having unlimited amount of hot chicks, and that's about it. Looking cool, I guess, is that, and so you need to think that those are the most important things in life. I think for most of us, certainly me, as we get older, I think we're really enticed by that when we're teenagers and we're not all that evolved, and even early 20s and stuff, before you have kids or you have really serious relationships or you lose someone close to you. These are the kinds of things that make you realize what's actually important in life. And I think we can teach that better to younger people, rather than, oh, you should base your life on, oh, I'm going to go make $100 million so that I can get 40 Bugattis because then I'm going to be happy. I think the conversation is, well, why do you think that? Like, why do you think that the answer and that power and the feeling that you're looking for is going to be found in that sort of dominance where you do whatever it takes to acquire the most money and the most chicks and stuff, and that's going to equal you feeling validated and everyone looking up to you. And that's all just an illusion. I think we know that sure, I think a certain amount of money to be able to comfortable and pay your bills, and no one's going to argue that that's going to be really important to living a fulfilling life. But the idea that you need a jet and you need to always be in a photo smoking a cigar and that you have to be really good at kickboxing and talk about how you would bash someone is like super juvenile stuff. And it's not what we should aspire to, because I think the fact is that often the loudest man in the room and the one who has to say, look at me all the time, is actually insecure and not particularly happy with who they are, and trying to fill a bottomless pit with stuff that's never going to fill it. And I think once you started actually living that way, you would probably, unless you're a sociopath, you'd probably learn, oh, that's not it, mate.
Yeah.
You know?
It's so hard to navigate, because on one end, these people who are shouting loud are calling you a loser. you're poor, you're broke, you're a loser. But sometimes that kicks people's ass to actually really I might be a loser. And they start working out, they start looking after themselves, they study, they work harder.
And so I think that's hard to argue with, because there's certain people out there who happily play the victim, might not even be aware that they do so, but might be in that funk. And the fact is that they're not taking any of the requisite action to improve their position. And sometimes it takes characters like that yelling that at them to start making that change. And I think, that's a good starting point, but that's not going to solve whatever it is under the surface that got you in that position in the first place. And I think it's possible to take good things. I think it's possible to take benefit away from some of what people say without subscribing to them as a leader or having to like everything that they say. And I'm not someone, you use Tate as an example because he's the one that everyone talks about the most. But there's certain things that he says which I agree with, and logically would say, I'd say the same thing. But there's other stuff that I disagree with. And just like every character out there pretty much, there's plenty of things people say where I say, I like that, I subscribe to that. But a lot of what else they say, I don't necessarily. And you can take something away from someone's point of view without having to be their acolyte and worship them. And then I think that's the thing with those polarizing characters. It's like you either love them or you hate them. And it's like, well, if you like this person, you love everything that they say, you stand for everything that they stand for, and you hate whoever they hate, right? And it's just an example of that polarity in our society. And I think it's one of the major problems that we have is that we really lack that shades of grey, moderate voice where we can say, people on the conservative side have a good point here, and people on the liberal side have a good point here, and we can sort of meet in the middle and discuss and disagree and find out that we're actually not all that different. But that's not as fun. It doesn't give us that tribal mentality that we're looking for increasingly, because we're trying to find that sense of community in being aggressive towards another group and shouting other people down. I think we should always be trying to have a conversation and always be open to potentially being able to learn from each other. Like, I love to see things in a different light, or for someone to say, for me to make my position clear and then have someone say, okay, well, I get what you're saying, but have you thought about this before? And actually be able to discuss that. I think that's how we can move forward as a society and build a more positive culture. But we'd have to stop just being convinced that we're right. I think anytime someone's absolutely convinced that they're right, especially all the time, is very dangerous. And you can guarantee that they're not, because any human being is not 100% right, and we don't know the truth. And anyone who's like, I know the truth, everyone else is an idiot, just be very wary of that.
Yeah. Cross-discipline, all industries, I think that truth holds up. Like, I'm in the fitness and wellness space. Anyone who says anything with 100% conviction is generally people.
But that content is what people watch, right?
Yeah.
Because if you've got someone coming on and they're going, all right, so this is what you're doing, and I can tell you guaranteed that that's bullshit, and you need to throw it out, and you need to do this instead. And if you don't, you're going to be a little bitch for life. Like, you're going to listen to that. Whereas if someone's coming on and they have a much more moderate perspective and they want to talk for a much longer time, it's much better content, but it's not going to it's not going to rack up the reaction in the same way. So we're always battling. We're always going to be battling against the algorithm, and increasingly so, especially as AI ramps up and that just goes completely out of control, and we're only ever seeing exactly what we've been programmed, or what we have programmed the algorithm to say, to show us. It's going to, it's going to be interesting what happens there, I think.
Yeah, some of these characters often talk about, just battling not battling emotions, stuffing emotions down, don't show weakness, push through.
Yeah.
On one level, you need to have some grit and suck it up and push through.
Yeah.
And perhaps with your experience and talking to stories, where do you think is the blur zone of you're just gritting, you're working hard, this sucks, you know it sucks, you can't see the end of the tunnel, but hang on, I think this has turned too negative.
Yeah.
My actual mental health is actually making my quality of life less. Do you have any sense of where that blend is and where that is? Like I have the conversation with you, hey, I'm struggling with this XYZ versus head down, I just need to push through the next 3 months.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and the answer is it's just subjective. It's different for everyone, and it comes down to self-awareness. I think it's giving people the tools and a different way to think about it, where we can actually assess how we're feeling. Like we can actually be in touch with our mental state and our body, and being able to recognize, how long have I been feeling this way? Am I having a hard week because of these external things that are stacking up? And that makes perfectly logical sense. And once I get through that, that really will take care of it, and I'll feel like I'm back up on top again. Or have I been saying that to myself for 6 weeks and I've been feeling like that the whole time? I absolutely think that there is necessity for people, whether they're men or women, to push through at certain times and be stoic at certain times, and put your head down and grit and bear it. I think that's part of being human, and we can't spend our whole time talking about how it makes us feel. And in some ways, that old school mentality of like just get it done, we need that. But like I was saying before, we've got to be able to balance that with, okay, now my cup runneth over, because we know that if you just pump the, nah, I'm going to carry the world on my shoulders and I'm just going to push through until this either gets done or it kills me, it'll kill you. Like it kills people. So that's actually not the right way forward. It's working out how much can I take, how much should I take, and actually understanding that I'm going to navigate this problem better for me and the people I care about if I let other people in earlier, if I take some time for myself earlier, if I go to the doctor earlier. I'm actually going to have a better chance of achieving whatever it is that I'm working towards. And I think looking at it in those practical terms, especially for men, is really important, because I think most of us would say at the end of the day, especially when our family's involved, we have kids or whatever, we would say, well, the most important thing to me is making it happen, like whatever I need to do, making the money, putting the food on the table, building the home, making sure everyone else is all right. I can sort of put myself on the back burner. That stuff needs to happen. I reckon most people would agree with that. And so it's about making people understand, yeah, part of that is looking after yourself along the way. Because if you just push and push and push and don't have that self-care, you're going to hit a wall, and that's going to look ugly for you and everyone else. And you're not actually going to be able to get to where you want to get to. So as a practical tool, training self-awareness and self-care and that proactive attitude towards health, mental health along the way is what's going to make the difference, so that you can be that guy. You can be that guy who keeps bearing the load. And it's not viewing it in a way where, oh, I'm going to push my burden onto other people because I'm too weak to handle it myself. It's viewing it with a different perspective of, I'm going to be able to do this if I'm able to be real and wise up to the fact that I'm human and I'm doing my best, but I need certain things to be able to continue. And you could do with another perspective. You need to think of it that way, and everyone's got their own gauge for how much they can do. One thing we do know though is that everyone has a limit. Everyone's got a limit, and pretending to yourself that you don't have a limit and that it's all just going to get better if you keep repeating the same behavior that's not working, you're delusional, and it will end up being a problem. And we see that time and time and time again. So it just takes that that maturity and that knowing yourself to actually be in touch with yourself and go, how long have I been feeling like this? And, how am I lying to myself, or why am I struggling so much, and actually being able to sit with that. And it's tough. It's a tough thing to do. It's a skill that we sort of have to work at. And hopefully we've got some people around us who can help. But the fact is all of us are there at some point in our life, often many times. So being able to recognize that when it's time is really what it all comes down to, I think.
The permission that, especially this last generation of men being okay to talk about these things, not just men and women, but this permission has created so much positivity around that. Like in the workforce, they're giving people space to support them. There was a podcast clip that went viral with Joe Rogan and this author called Abigail Shrier. Have you seen it?
Mm-hmm.
She ultimately has put out a notion that potentially at times we're over-prescribing therapy, where it's not needed. And without going through the whole podcast, she did put in a point. She didn't say it was bad, just that potentially that we're maybe over-prescribing it. Although true, do you think we're just still too far away from that? Like we're still actually not, as friends, mates, brothers, we're still not talking enough to each other to warrant to say, look, we're talking about this too much. Because one of the ideas that she brought forward was the more that you talk about bad feelings, the worse that they get, or the more they can fester and grow.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of comes back to where you said, how long have I been feeling this? When do I act on it? Sort of these blurred lines of, ruminating is inducing anxiety, which is making the situation worse.
Yeah.
So there's a level of, I got to stuff it down, but also I need to still talk about it. And
which is Andrew Tate's argument for saying depression isn't real, right? Same thing, where his whole thing was, well, if you focus on it, you give yourself the label of, I'm depressed, then you're going to act out being a depressed person, and that's why depression is not real, which is not true. But that as a justification, you can see that makes sense, and understand talking about over-prescribing or over-diagnosing and having a culture which just chronically focuses on and everything that's wrong, and in a way where it's like you're looking for an excuse. I can see how that could become a problem. I think, again, my answer is balance. Is anytime you're swinging massively to one side or the other, it's going to be an issue. So in your example there, that would be if you are constantly being pessimistic possibly, or talking about all the problems that you have all the time and not having enough of the other side of it, which is, life is hard and there's things I'm dealing with, there's action that I'm taking to improve things. It's not perfect. I go up and down, but sometimes I need to just put one foot in front of the other and keep going. So if you don't have that balance and it's all just woe is me and I can't get past any of this and I constantly think about all the things that are wrong, versus the other side of nothing's ever wrong, don't talk to me about it because I'm just not thinking about it. We've got to be able to find that balance in the middle. And I don't think going backwards to being more of a culture of, when men were men, and I think there's such a romantic attitude, particularly among, I guess, like the sort of incel community, but of the idea that things were better before, like just in all of the human experience. Like we know that life on Earth today is far better in every category, just about, than it's ever been. Yet we complain more and talk about how it's the worst because we're exposed to more than we ever were before, and we see more negativity than we have ever seen before by virtue of all of the tools that we have. But the fact is, life on Earth now is incredible, and there's just so many advantages that never existed before. I think you couldn't even have a hot shower back in the 50s, I'm pretty sure, like we live like, there's some stats out there that we live like the kings of old, like the everyday man now who would consider themselves to be a poor person would lives like a king compared to a few centuries ago.
Yeah, we've got running water. We don't shit in a chamber pot
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
get it shooted off somewhere.
Yeah. So there's this sometimes fantastical view of the past, of how society used to be better and how men used to be better. Sometimes that's purported by women with memes and stuff. When men were men, men used to go off to war and now they just want to go and have a cry. This idea that, yeah, it was better back then. Yeah, sure. But men used to and still do go off to war and end up with PTSD and have massive mental health issues because they have to go and have those experiences. So like, I don't think the answer is ever going to be, oh, we should go back to our old ways where we didn't talk about it, and men especially just hardened up and got on with the job, because we know that approach doesn't work. We know that there's 9 Australians dying by suicide every day. Suicide's a massive problem around the world. We know in Australia 7 of those are men, and that a huge part of that problem has been that expectation and that pressure on men of, you need to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, and if you can't handle it, then you shouldn't be here. We know that that's an attitude which we've got to do away with. So yeah, it's about balancing it. Like we're saying, you've got to be able to be stiff upper lip and push through sometimes. I think there's a lot to be said for that. But then you've also got to be able to recognize that you are fallible and there's no shame in that, and you've got to do something about that. Otherwise, it'll do something about you, and then you won't have any control.
Yeah, your statistic to the daily suicides, like our demographic especially, our highest risk to ourselves is ourselves. Like,
Yeah. Suicide's the number one killer of people 15 to 44.
which in some sense puts a bit of pressure. I was like, oh shit, wow, like I'm responsible for that, but then also might give you the agency of, oh, like I do need to look out for myself.
Yeah.
And like you said, I like this idea of when you're swinging on one side of the fence, when you're just stuffing it all down and gritting too much, versus everything's shit all the time and that's all you're talking about with your friends. And
Yeah. Because it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think that, and there are many legitimate mental illnesses, and people have had horrifically traumatic backgrounds, and there's no taking anything away from that and the impact that can have on people's lives as they live their life. But yeah, there's always positivity to be found, and there's always steps you can take to start to improve your life and make things better. And action starts from changing thoughts, changing your thinking pattern and your perception. And often that comes with therapy and medication, and that's part of it. But before you see a change in behavior, as you know, with your coaching, it's the mind. It's changing how you're approaching things in your perception. And that might just be tiny little steps, but that leads to big change. So anyone who's ever made strides and turned their life around has done so by starting to change their thinking and then molding that with action.
Yeah, fully agree. What's your take on life coaches, gurus? There seems to be a very lucrative industry that can charge a lot with getting services or advice that is completely unprofessional, maybe not unsolicited, but we'll just call it a spade a spade. There's very people who are uneducated on a specific topic, acting out as therapists,
Yeah.
talking about shadow work and trauma release work. And okay, there might be some positive transformations in that space, but maybe I'm in a bit of an echo chamber, but I see this and I think, this is the wild, wild fucking West.
Yeah.
Whereas like I am coming to the guru, the bro, who again might have all the answers, that messiah that you were kind of talking about, but maybe it's Andrew Tate dialed back 50%. But even that they've got some of the answers and you're going to them in a very vulnerable place.
Yeah.
Again, maybe it's a bit about balance, but do you have concerns in that space where...
This one's not about balance.
No.
Yeah, I have concerns for sure, man. For sure. Look, I think a lot of people operating in that shadowy grey area of an industry, which is totally unregulated still for now, are manipulative and snake oil salesmen, and very good ones in a lot of cases. And they're selling the dream in a simplistic fashion, no different to the influencers that we know, where you're getting people to sign up and pay you thousands and thousands of dollars, which is just a price you've come up with out of nowhere because
it makes it work.
If you're charging thousands of dollars an hour, and a qualified psychologist who studied for 15 years, got their master's and has their own practice is charging 250, well, yeah, who are you? Where have you pulled that from? And also, what are you basing all of these programs and all of this advice on? Because I think it is really important when we're talking about mental health in particular that it's got integrity and it's been rigorously researched. When you're talking about counseling people and telling them what changes to make with their mind and their life, it's different to a podcast where you're having a conversation with someone and they're sharing their experience, but actually saying to people, this is what you need to do, this is what you've been doing. And your level of education is you've read a couple of books and you saw some other programs on the internet, and then you sort of changed the words around them, and you went to the gym a bunch of times and surrounded yourself with other people who did similar and convinced yourself that you're now a guru. I think that's a pretty shaky ground to be walking on. And I don't think it's all totally bullshit, because I've spoken to people who have done both traditional counseling through psychs and stuff and have got something out of that. And then they also work with life coaches that they get something else out of, and they think that that is a valid way to spend money, and then they get something from that they can't get from traditional therapy that's helped them a lot. So I think there's something to be said for that. I think probably all business coaches, or definitely all business coaches and life coaches, aren't created equal. So I don't want to just totally shit on the entire industry. But I sort of think, how can some dude in his 20s be qualified to teach people how to live life when you've only just started yours? And it's kind of like, what have you done? I think if you're a business coach and you've made various successful businesses and you are still working in those businesses, and you can say, here's my catalog of credibility, then more power to you. That's sort of like consulting at that point. But if you haven't done anything and you're preaching to people what they need to do to be more like you based off your own subjective experience without taking into account a whole suite of things that are fundamental to psychology and actually safe practice, and you're not qualified, and people are taking what you're saying and as gospel and basing their life on it, that is very well, I don't believe it's a good thing, Theo, anyway.
It's shaky grounds. Like, we're picking out some books that are in your background. There's probably a $10,000 masterclass that you could create with the philosophies of that. But,
Well,
but,
that's right.
but who am I to synthesize each of those lessons and telling you this is the prescription
Yeah.
because you're feeling X? Well, then I've learned you need Y. You need a dose of Y.
Yeah. I just think it's like, who the fuck are you to be able to think that you can tell people that just. Also, it's basing programs all off of your own experience. Like, you're one person, and you can say, oh, well, I felt this way and then I did this and that worked for me. And so I've now packaged that up, and that's what I sell to people and coach people on. It's like, okay, but humans are so diverse in their background and their life experience and everything they go through and what they're receptive to, and we're all so wildly different. So it's just not possible to be able to help all kinds of people with one prescription, which you've made up based off of your limited life experience. It just doesn't make sense. And it's very sexy the way it's sold. It's much sexier to, I want to go pay a life coach because they're jacked and they've got a hot girlfriend and they talk about how they make all this money and how they're alpha, and like, I want to be alpha, rather than I want to go and confront my past trauma and work on these deep-seated issues which are leading me to live a life that I would rather not live, and I want to be someone else. And what I should do is actually go and see a qualified professional and go that route. But that does not seem as fun as booking a call with these dudes with their shirts off, and that seems way more fun. So maybe I just need to do that at a much higher marked up price.
Point, yeah.
But I'm going to feel pumped and motivated and psyched much faster. And rather than focusing on starting to address these things I need to address, I'm just going to immediately be like, fuck yeah, I'm going to change my life this week. And who's to say that doesn't have a genuinely positive effect? I think it must, at least in the short term, because people keep on doing this. They keep on signing up. They keep on renewing their memberships to these groups and going back to these programs. So there must be something in that. And I think there certainly is, because there's something in community. We know that there's something in like-minded people being together to try to better themselves, like, no doubt. So I think there's a lot of good feeling around that. But I just wonder, months, years down the track, what are you actually left with that you can draw on that's actually helped you? Because this isn't cognitive behavioral therapy. There's not a framework that's legitimate and researched that you can actually go back and draw on. It's just like, oh yeah, what was that quote from Nietzsche that guy said to me? So I feel like, how does it last and actually deliver you what you need once that feeling of being pumped up and motivated leaves you, and so does $10,000? What are you actually left with that helps you? And I just think it needs to be regulated, that industry. Anytime we have industries where there's the potential to make a lot of money and there aren't any rules, there's a lot of cowboys, and there's a lot of malpractice and potentially people getting hurt until something happens that it gets regulated. And yeah, I'm surprised that there hasn't been more done in that space where there's so blatantly stuff going on which is not particularly safe or good for people. And there's a lot of money being made that the government isn't getting. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens in that space. I think it will probably take something like suicides related to life coaching for things to change, where people there's a direct line between people taking their lives and the advice that they have got, which wasn't qualified advice. But we'll see.
Yeah, it's hard because those people, like you said, there's definitely good about it. Like, I get amped up. There's like,
Hell yeah.
I'm a bro deep down.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm like, I'm a bro. I lift and I push fitness and whatnot, and I can very much be the bro. I can play that archetype,
Yeah,
and it pumps me out.
me too, and that's good. But I think that's a fundamental need, and something that I think has been missing for men in particular is that men getting together, being physical, pumping each other up, being positive, going hunting, whatever it is. Like that's actually really key, and that's in our wiring to want that level of connection. So there's nothing wrong with that, but it's what that's coupled with and the price tag that comes along with it. That's the problem.
Yeah. Like in retrospect, when I've gone through challenges in my life, particularly more in my early 20s, the people who I resonated with are just people who are going through the same experience as I. And although your friend can be empathetic, there's not much wisdom there. And you do need that support. But really, in retrospect, it was I just needed to talk to someone who's probably been through this, someone who's that bit older. And it's only probably till I got to about like 30 that I think you actually start listening to your parents a little bit more. You probably switched
Especially
a few
once
years
you
ago.
become a dad as well.
Yeah, I think that, like, without sounding corny, like that moment was, like my parents, they were fucking right the whole time. They actually did have my back and just had really hard conversations with me that I wasn't ready to have. So potentially, it's just maybe it's a messy part of life where there is advice that you ought to take on, but you're not ready to receive it, or it's coming from someone who's triggering you or, grinding up on something.
I think, it's tricky because there would be plenty of good in that, going to those retreats, having those experiences which feel transformative and maybe in some way. Like, I think there's a way of separating the good from the bad. I think that they would have redeeming qualities, which they obviously do because people keep signing up for them. But yeah,
I think it's just when you play doctor or you play another professional. Like one thing as a fitness coach, I talk about programming.
Stay in your lane.
Yeah, like I'm talking about strength training and fitness. I don't talk about diet much, even though I know quite a lot about diet actually.
Yeah.
It's not my lane. And then specifically kind of this industry we're talking about, there's lots of good in that. But when you blend that line over and you're playing the doctor, I think that might be the line.
That was the point I was trying to make is like if we're talking about life coaching and say you want to be more confident, you got low self-esteem and you want to be more confident and you want to be someone that people notice and you want to take charge at work and you want to be more assertive in your relationship, whatever, like the kinds of things that I assume people would come to coaches for. I fail to see how that doesn't quickly turn into a conversation about what you've been through and your childhood and where do these systems that you're operating with come from? Because to actually change those things, you need to dig back into someone's personal history and why are they thinking and acting in the way that they are. And there's actually a scientific, rigorous, proper way to do that where you're unearthing often people's trauma and working through that. And there's a real need to be very cautious in that. How do you not end up there if you're coaching? I think some people would say, nah, we just talk about motivation, bro. Like we don't go there, but it's like, how can you not go there? Especially when it's emotionally charged, doing these activities or breath work or whatever it is, where you're working yourself up into a state and people are getting emotional and letting all of that out. On one hand, really good, but on the other hand, the person on the other end isn't actually equipped to handle it in the right way. If this person starts talking about they're abused or something really full on, and what they're just going to give him bro advice and bro science, and then ask huge money in return for it. So I think, it's just such muddy water with that, where there are elements of that where you really need someone who knows what they're talking about and very easily end up totally out of your depth. And then I think a lot of the life coaches are friends with each other and kind of convince each other and justify to each other that what they're doing is legit and they're helping people, but then on the other hand, they're also bragging about how much fast money they're making. And I think they maybe convince themselves that they're actually doing something good. I don't think most people are malicious. I just think we can very easily delude ourselves into thinking that we are legit and we're helping people. And I think for some people, you have imposter syndrome because you're an imposter. I think there's plenty of people where you have imposter syndrome because that's a normal thing that we need to work through, and not many people would walk into a particular massive event or a huge life-changing step up and not feel like an imposter in the beginning. So I'm not saying imposter syndrome is not a thing, but I think for some people who may talk about imposter syndrome a lot, it's like, yeah, bro, because you're an imposter.
Yeah. You don't have to do the deep work to look through that. But like you're right. When you have those conversations, you can't not go into the past. Like you said before, we're generally quite assertive. We work hard. We've got this grittiness, and then the conversation is going to come up. Like, why is that, bro? Like, Are you working because you're just terribly insecure? Like, I know I've done that in the past. Like, I've just worked so much harder because it's a coping mechanism for an insecurity.
Yeah.
So it's just like, and it takes one step to get there.
Yeah.
So it's not like you're taking 5-6 steps. It's just like we're here, we're talking about this, we're talking about motivation and discipline. And in one step we're in these grounds and we're talking about childhood and it might not matter to me, but for the next person, that is
dude, that's serious shit.
That's done.
And if you're really emotionally intelligent and you're charismatic and you're clever and you're good at reading people, you can have that. You can make those assumptions like a therapist might and say, oh, well, maybe you feel like that because of this. And but you're going there without actually having the right to be able to go there. And you're just winging it at that point. It would be like me as a mental health podcaster going from, we share stories and we talk about what's happened to me telling them about why they think that and why they feel that way and what they need to do. And that would be a pretty obvious overstepping of the mark.
Yeah, I think you do that. A terrific job in not playing that. Like you hold the space and you have the skills to talk through a story, but you're not a messiah and you don't act it. But
I also don't get paid to do it.
Community podcaster gives out unsolicited advice that could charge $10,000 for.
That's right. But like someone like me, I could market myself as a life coach. I could do a 180.
I think you could do a very good job at it.
You know, I've got emotional intelligence. I'm good. When I have those podcast conversations, I'm making reads on people and using techniques to get them to divulge more about themselves and think about things in a different way. You know, I've got those capacities, but I know that I've got no fucking qualification to try to fix people or give them advice because that's not my job. It's very different when you're just creating a space for people to share their own experience and for the benefit of others, and there's no money involved versus, I am your guru based off of not much.
Yeah.
And we don't hear it's been interesting to talk about it. It's something that I talk about at home quite often and can become quite a heated topic. But I haven't heard many people speaking about that, the dark side of that industry yet. And it seems to me like there's a lot of examples out there of stuff that seems a bit on the nose. That said, as we mentioned, I definitely think that there's a place for it in some contexts. Some people who actually are the real deal and have a history to show that and can stay in their lane while still offering a valuable service. I think that can fulfill a need. So I'm not saying it's all bullshit, but there certainly are a lot of charlatans out there.
Yeah, I've been talking about this a lot, so it was very cool to hear your experiences experiences in that. Maybe pivoting back to earlier on about asking for help for when we do blend. Okay, we're going through this hard time, but actually want to talk about it. Are there any scripts or tools, or I guess first lines of low friction where that can start to happen? Because like, hey, like I'm not ready to talk to a therapist. That's a GP visit. I have to wait 3 weeks for, and I've got anxiety about that, and I'm probably going to cancel it. Or you understand why there's friction there.
Yeah.
I guess, are there tangible ways of low friction, low consequence of reaching out? How would one go about that? Or are there potentially scripts of reaching out to someone? How do I start that conversation?
Yeah. So you can find this on Are You OK's website. So that as a resource, and then also based off of all the hundreds of conversations I've had with people where they've talked about what's actually helped them. And what I say when I visit schools and do talks and that sort of thing is to keep it really simple, because it can be really overwhelming being on the other end of that and quite confronting. We don't know how to respond if someone's actually really struggling that we care about, and we have a tendency to feel like we want to fix a problem. Like, how can I make that go away quickly? Like I need to jump in and I need to do something. And you do, but that's something that you need to do is just shut up and listen and be there for that person. Show them that you're there for them. So if someone's coming to you and they're actually opening up and talking to you for the first time, rather than cutting them off and saying, that's too big for me, you need to go off and talk to a professional immediately. If you do that, even though it's with good intentions, you're not seeing and hearing that person, and they're not going to feel validated, and they're going to just go inward and they might not share it again. So the thing to do is always to listen when someone comes to you with something like that. Put a hand on their shoulder if appropriate, just give them the time, don't interject. And we call it sitting in the mud. So you sit in the mud with them, get down on their level and validate those feelings. Don't just say, oh, well, you shouldn't feel that way, or no, that doesn't make sense because X, Y, Z. Listen to them first. Let the person get it all out, because often if we're at the point of actually speaking to someone, saying that we need help or we're really struggling, we've been thinking about it over and over in our head for weeks and months and years. So giving someone the opportunity to actually speak that out loud, in speaking, they are hearing it said for the first time and might actually be able to piece some things together or see it from another perspective. And that's actually a really important tool, is speaking it out loud, because that's when you realize if things do or don't line up. And if you can't say it to anyone, another good thing to do is to write it down. So write it out, but don't just leave it in your head, because when you leave it in your head, it snowballs and it spins round and round and it can't go anywhere. And it can often turn into a negative voice, which can say nasty things to you and possibly lead you to a dark place. So when you're on the other side, listen. And then once it's time to talk, that's when you ask them. So rather than say, all right, well, here's what we're going to do. You're going to go to the doctor and then XYZ. You say, well, what can I do for you? What do you need from me? And actually leave that with the person to answer, because they're going to feel like you're there for them and that they've been heard. And then they'll be able to tell you what you can do for them. And then from there, depending on what they say and how urgent it is. I mean, if someone's telling you that they're suicidal, then it's always a 000 call. If it's that extreme, calling the ambulance. But if it's not at that level yet, then listening to them, asking them what they need from you, and then if it's appropriate, you can share maybe some of your own experience, maybe give them some of your own perspective, maybe suggest some things that they could do. That's all going to be a bit subjective, but you're just not telling people how it is and what they need to do. And you are most importantly giving them that time and that space to talk where they're going to feel like they're being heard, because that's going to encourage them to do it again and let you in on the situation and know that you're not just going to throw it back at them, even if you've got good intentions. I think that's a typical reaction is we start hearing that someone's really struggling and we go, well, you need to go and do this right now because it freaks us out and we want it to go away. But just shut up in that moment and be there for them. And then that's if they come to you and talk. If you can tell something's off with someone, but they won't talk to you, then that's difficult in its own way. That's when you say, hey, I noticed that you've been a bit off lately. I'm worried about you. Just letting you know I'm here for you if you want to have a chat anytime. And they might not be receptive to that. First of all, they might say, no, I'm fine, it's all good. You can revisit that again later. If things aren't changing, you can say, hey, just saying again, I can still, this whole week, I can still tell that something's a bit off, and like, I'm here for you, man. Like, really, you can talk to me. And then it might be a day later, or it might be straight away. Who knows? They might send you a message and say, oh, actually, and it might be that they feel like they can't talk to you face to face in the moment, but they might message you later and say, oh, actually, yeah, you're right. And then they might start talking. So it's about just gently introducing that, not making any sort of accusations or judgments, and then revisiting it once. If people are brushing it off and you can tell that, yeah, actually, that you're not telling the truth, going back to them again and not giving up on people. And then once you start being there for someone, checking in on them as well. Like, don't just do it once and be like, okay, all sweet. Like, we had that one chat and they said they were going to go to the doctor and like, all good. The step above that is to actually follow up and be like, hey, how you doing, man? It's been a week now. Did you end up doing X, Y, Z? That's being a really good friend or a really good family member. And also looking after yourself. If you're looking after someone and you're being there for someone, it can be quite emotionally intense for you, and we're living our own lives at the same time. So sometimes people who are putting a lot of energy into helping someone can end up struggling themselves. So making sure that you're talking to someone, help the helper, and making sure that, yeah, you need to stay on top of your own health and only take on as much as you can. Otherwise you might end up falling in a heap as well.
Yeah, that's all very practical, great advice. I like the idea of just sitting in the mud with them, just not overreacting, just jumping in there, fixing, especially guys, right? We fix. Oh, I was like, you're feeling that because of that, dude. You just got to fix that, and then it's all gravy.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. And we're basing that off our own experience. Or the one I always think of is maybe a more boisterous mother who, she loves you, but she's that more commanding, not my mother, but others I know, that more commanding presence who, as soon as they hear that, they just want to dive in and say, well, what are you talking about? That's not a problem. Or okay, well, Karen's son, he saw this person, so we're gonna do that. We're gonna get you. So there's like good intentions there, but it's just not the right way of approaching it. And all the people I've ever spoken to talk about suicide attempts or really struggling mentally. They talk about the people who are able to sit in the mud with them and just be there with them. That's what really helped them. And so that's good because it's a simple way of approaching it and takes the pressure off us, because I think one of the reasons why we might stress out about how do I help this person is we're thinking like, I have to know the answer. Like, I have to come up with the solution, and how do I do that? And the thing is, you don't do that. You be there with them and you ask them and you care about them. And that's all you got to do.
so I see you as one of those helpers. How do you look after yourself? And do you feel a responsibility, not only in your podcast where people are sharing their stories, do you feel like because you are a leader in this space that you become the mental health guy, and then that friend might just unload on you? I don't know if you've had that experience of, because you've given the permission to everyone, and then they see you as someone they can trust.
Yeah.
So you're not just doing it on a podcast on a professional, journalistic level. You probably be experiencing this on a more grand scale than the typical friend. So I
Yeah.
guess there's a bit there, but how do you look after yourself so you help yourself being the helper?
Yeah, you got to have boundaries because I'm that kind of person anyway, but certainly doing the podcast, it does open the door for that. And then you're getting messages from people, or you're spending time with people because they're struggling, and you're a good person and you have regard for them, so you're going to go and give them that time. You've got to be able to draw the line somewhere, and I do try to practice what I preach in monitoring how I'm going and how much can I take on, and how much of a good place am I in to be able to put energy into this, because it is that simple. Like, it does drain you. Like, even doing the podcast and just having those conversations and putting the content together and thinking about all that, that drains me. And then the other level to it of people actually messaging you, or coming to you personally, that's another level of draining there. So you have to know where you say, enough's enough. Like, I can only do so much. I'm one person and always going to be compassionate and empathetic, and try to be there for people, especially people who I'm really close to. But understanding that I'm no use to anyone if I'm not good myself. So I'm really conscious of that, looking after myself piece. And then just in general function terms, I've got a lot on. Like, I work full time as well as doing the podcast. Like, that's just a community service that I do on the side, but it's certainly a involved one. But I work, and I've got a relationship, and I've got a life just like everyone else. Lots happening, and I find I've got to be dialed in on getting 8 hours of sleep and eating well and training just about every day, and not drinking alcohol and not getting fucked up, to keep the momentum going. Like, I can manage it all, and I get a huge amount of gratification out of my life, and I love my life. And that's exciting enough for me. I can do it all, but only if I'm firing on all cylinders. And as soon as that's not happening, then I struggle, especially with something that's so emotionally intensive as doing the podcast. I can happily handle that, and I'm grateful to, if I feel really physically and mentally healthy, I can juggle it all. If I'm off, or haven't had much sleep, or I feel sick, or I'm emotionally exhausted, then it's like a real struggle to manage to keep that going. Like, my mind and body have to be clear and healthy to be up to the task. And I think you're a great example of that, man. Like, you're so hectic. Those day in the life of Theo reels that you post, of just because, I mean, you were always this kind of man anyway, but especially now wanting to be that example for Yanni, how, you're getting up at 3:34 in the morning still, just so you can go and run, because by the time you get back, that's when Georgia's got to go to the gym, and then your day begins. And most people don't don't do that, but I think that's you should be very proud of the way that you conduct yourself and live your life. And I love that you're already so conscious of setting that example and wanting to be the healthiest version of yourself that you can possibly be for your son and your family, and setting that standard and keeping it, because that's integral to who you are. And if you're the guy who's getting up at 4 a.m. to run, and has his meals planned, and is doing his coaching, and has his job, and is being an attentive, great father, and a loving partner, and a family man, you can handle all of that, and you can do super well in all of those areas, and you have the patience with Yanni and all the pressures you're under, because you take such good care of yourself physically, and that gives you the capacity to be able to do it all. And part of that would be having that self-awareness of how are you going and how much can you push. And there would need to be certain days where you don't get up and run because it can go too far the other way too.
Yes.
And you'd be a real example of that because you're literally an Ironman where, again, balance, because you can take fitness and personal excellence to that perfectionist ultra level, and that becomes unhealthy too, I think. But I reckon you've got to. How do you think you've got that balanced out?
Well, firstly, thank you for those words. I really appreciate those. It's tough in that because I have been the full health optimizer, bro. I've tracked my sleep religiously with Oura rings. I saw that you're wearing a Whoop band.
The Whoop runs my life, bro.
I've done all that tracking, the diet tracking, the sleep tracking, the stress tracking, and I've been dialed in, the meditating, the journaling. Not unfortunately, I've had to carve back some things. I make compromises on the perfect health regimen to enable me to do the things that are most important for me. So what you said, to the things that you need to do to fire on all cylinders. Your capacity is large because of those things. For me, getting up super early, I get 7 hours of sleep where I need 8, and I've had 8. I know how great 8 feels. However, me not doing that run means I am in the most foul shit mood. I'm not who I need to be to do all those things. And so culling back just that little bit, I need to do that run. I see my run as a mental health insurance. And I don't like to, and I talk about this a bit on my socials, I don't ever want to overstate the importance of it. But at the same time, I think I'm underestimating it. Like if I didn't, and I think you might resonate with this, if I didn't train for 2 weeks, I promise you I will not be in a good place.
No,
not necessarily emergency.
Well, it's the ultimate antidepressant.
It's going in that direction. The feel good hormones, and you may have already talked about this on podcasts, in the benefits of exercise in contrast to potentially other therapies,
those
and
endorphins.
even pharmaceuticals. They have a place, but so does exercise, and it's actually my lane. So I don't like to overstate it, but like I know what physical exercise can do. I'll stay out of this one. I'll keep the podcast to you, but yeah, like I just need to do it. So sometimes it's in the morning and sometimes I beat my drums too. The discipline, bro. I get into that bro energy and that pumps me up enough. But sometimes that is what needs to happen to get out the door.
Yeah.
And I just see it as a necessity at this point. It's less about the Ironman, the marathon, the event. Without it, I'm just poor in every sense. Physical health, mental health.
Can you have a day off though?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't beat myself up for not training, and I have the rest days.
I think that's an important point to make there, because I reckon you can cross that boundary into the sort of self-punishment zone where, and I've probably been close to this before, where I would like really struggle to not train like once and verging into overtraining, where I think part of having a healthy relationship with your body and your mind is being able to feel, no, I've trained the last 4 or 5 days in a row. My body's really sore. I don't need to do it today, and being like all right with that.
Yeah, I got taught by one of my first Ironman coaches. He asked the question, and I talked to this: is this hurting or is this hurting me? There's a level of discomfort or pain that we must push through, especially in our physical body, in order to adapt, progress, overload. But is it hurting yourself? And having that honest conversation of where that line is. So it's like, yeah, today's going to be the rest day.
Also, depending on your training, like I've done various things, always bodybuilding, lifting weights, not like serious bodybuilding, competing or anything, but lifting weights for hypertrophy to gain mass, doing bulking and cutting. Also did martial arts for a fair while, and I've done some running, sprinting stuff as well. Like lately have been really rededicated to tracking everything in the gym, progressive overload. like actually eating enough again, rather, because before that I cut for ages and just span my wheels, cut off the fat, but it was like just a waste of time, really. Like, unless you're gonna compete, and the impact of that on your mind and body is just like not good. And Mary, my partner's like, "You're way nicer now." Like, and I wasn't even doing it for any reason other than to just prove a point to myself, right?
Yeah, you're so much nicer when you're not 7%.
Yeah. And but you learn a lot doing those kinds of things, but you kind of learn that it's not worth, that's not worth it. But now I actually need a rest day because I'm training hard. Like, there's a difference between training and going through the motions. I've always trained, but there's training and there's training, and like, you really know that. And when you're really pushing it and you're actually making gains, you grow while you repair and rest. So I found that that's made it easier for me to have a day of rest or two in the week, because it's like, yeah, I actually need to make the progress that I'm looking to make. Whereas I imagine if it's Ironman training or it's about endurance, then that's different, because you're not trying to gain like muscle size. It's just about how much can my central nervous system and my mind take.
Yeah, endurance training is hard in that because, especially with triathlon training, if your legs are cooked, it's all good. I can just swim. So you've got 3 sports to punish yourself, quote unquote, to your point of. So it is hard to draw that line. And yeah, you're right. It's how much can my CNS, my central nervous system, take on? And I think you have to break yourself. When I say this, you do need to push yourself to the limit to know where you are. And I think this comes back to some of this conversation in general of where your safe limits are. It's okay to be uncomfortable, go through grit and push through, but you got to know when the alarm bells start ringing and when you're blending over to that side. And I think that's the same of the physical body and to the mental side. It's not necessarily correlated, but it's a similar idea, perhaps.
And how much is it your identity? Like, how much what do you have left to prove, you know? Because you're getting up and doing that because you're proving to yourself day after day, like, I am that guy. And is there a point at which you know that and you believe that, and I think you come off the gas a bit without immediately gripping back on and being like, oh, I'm so scared if I come off it all, I'll lose it all, and I won't be this guy, and it will all slip, and that's what will happen. Like, I don't think that would happen. Can you? And I think you probably have to, by necessity, have a bit more of a balanced life now that you've got a kid and want to have more letting yourself off the hook. Not like you're any less of a man or you're any less of an athlete, but it's like, yeah, bro, like, we know you're hard. Like,
This is so hard. This is like the
we
daily
know, like,
conversation.
yes, you are, Theo. Like, you're that guy, bro. It's okay, man. Like, you don't have to whip yourself that hard all the time. Because like, as you get older, that might start to work against you if you're pushing it, because you're based on the fact that I'm the guy who pushes it, and then you end up kind of like Goggins with no knee cartilage.
Yeah, you're right, and I'm still going. I'm still learning through this, and that's why on my social media I do try to show transparency of we didn't sleep last night because we're a parent, and it's on some level it's like, look, I only slept 5 hours and I still trained. Why aren't you? But it's just showing that like, I'm not going to be as fit. I'm not going to put on as much muscle. And to objective measurement that you once would track, it's okay to slip off from that. And I think just talking about it, just showing that transparency.
But also, I love that you do it. I think you have to do that, and it makes it resonate way more as well, because it's actually realistic and practical. I think there's heaps of influencers or fitness people we see, and they're like, yeah, I did this as my routine. And I think heaps of people would think, yeah, okay, but you don't have a job and you don't have a kid, so like, why is that? Why does that?
How do you have a 3-hour routine? Yeah.
How do I relate to that? But you say, okay, I might not be at the apex of Ironman performance at some point, but you're a kick-ass dad, and is that not your number one priority now?
Yeah, it is. It is my first priority.
Yeah.
And to the point of being the identity part, My identity has flipped completely. Like I see myself like being a father is like one of my primary identities, and I see it in a positive way. And in relation to fitness, being the gym bro or the endurance bro, and I guess I sell coaching in that you do to a point have to be the look,
Yeah.
and I do sometimes put pressure on myself, but I also know that I've never prescribed a program that I've never done. I've never asked someone to do something that I haven't done, taught other people in. And so there is just a balance there. But yeah, to a point, it's hard to fight with our identity of just being the front all the time, just being always dialed in. Like sometimes, it's only a few months ago, I started watching TV, bro.
Yeah.
I watched Desperate Housewives with Georgia. Like I used to pay her out sometimes. Like, why are you watching this shit? And then
And it comes for us all, man.
we were
Comes for us all.
I'm just always just dialed in, and like I've just really enjoyed just watching an hour of TV. Whereas previously, like, what are you doing? You should be working. You should be working harder.
Yeah.
And so I think
That's what I mean. I'm not saying resting in your laurels or whatever, but actually appreciating and enjoying what you've built. And it's my view that you are who you are now. Like it's solidified. You have the spirit that you have and the mindset that you have. It's not going to stop. Like it's going to endure throughout your life. And I think that really is the prize, is the ultimate prize, because your body and the rest of your life will be a manifestation of the level of discipline that you've built and the way that you approach your life. But I think being able to mitigate that with a level of just being able to relax a bit, man, is probably good for your heart and your blood pressure and stuff, and just good for your sense of actual enjoyment in life too, because I think there's so many goals to achieve and you can always get better and you can always work harder. And the attitude of, oh, I'll start enjoying it when I get to this point, then I'll enjoy it. And we live life like we haven't started life yet, and it's going to begin somewhere down the road once we've achieved it all. And then before you know it, you're just dead, or you're too old to be able to enjoy it. So I think it's important to be able to smell the roses along the way and indulge yourself to a degree, because you are legit. You've done the work. You continue to do the work. You are the guy. And it's important to be able to actually enjoy that and have some relaxation and just chill a bit too.
yeah, and like we were talking about it just before this podcast. Behind me is a poster with 4,000 weeks. So inspired by a book. The general synopsis for those listening is there's roughly 4,000 weeks of life to a median life expectancy of 88 years. And so that has been one of the reminders, although challenging, of just enjoying the moment. And it brings me back to a question that Tim Ferriss talks to his guests about. He asked a question, and I'd like to know your answer. In 10 years' time, what would you wish you did more or less of? And I think I ask myself that pretty repeatedly, and it comes back to family. But maybe I will answer it. But first, like in 10 years' time, what do you think you would want to do more or less of right now?
I think I would say more podcasting, more interviewing, more storytelling. That's my real passion in terms of work, and my contribution to the community is being able to use this skill to tell those stories. Like that's what I want to do. If I could do that as my job, I would. So I think if I am not doing that and I'm still spending the bulk of my time working another job, which I enjoy and is fulfilling and it serves its purpose, I think in 10 years I would say that I wish I'd just found a way to just interview and speak and tell stories, because that's really what I know I want to do. And then I think the other one I already understand, which is it's all about friends and family for me. It's about spending that time with people while they're here and you're together and having those experiences and lots of laughs and understanding that that's really what life's about. And hopefully being blessed to have a child in the next few years and be able to be really attentive and an important part of their life and always there for them and be their hero like you are. I think that'll that'll be the focus on what I really want to get out of life. Less of would be just the noise, just doing, you know, partying, which I don't do much of anymore. I did plenty of that, as you know, back in the day. Any real frivolous type stuff where you're actually damaging your health, or you're not putting your mental or physical health as a priority, and all that does is make you feel shit and set you back. I would definitely say I don't want to spend much time doing that. I've been actively doing a lot less of that, and I think that comes as your priorities change and you have this life where it is. I'm blessed to have a life where it is really fulfilling, and I've got lots to do, and I get a lot out of that, and it's makes me feel really good, and I need to be in top order to be able to do it. So therefore, I'm more than happy to not be out on Hindley Street till the early hours on the tiles now, because I've got stuff to do, and I don't want to feel shit. I want to feel good all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Like you don't see like you miss that anymore because you're doing other things that bring you so much more fulfillment. And maybe that's just the arc
Yeah.
that you got to go through.
Well, hopefully,
You
man.
got to come from the arc of potentially partying all the time. Like you're not going to talk. If I talk to 20-year-old Callum, like bro, you just settle. And he's like, what do you mean? Like, I look good. I'm having fun.
Yeah, I know I got away with it, and it was what it was at the time, and I don't regret it. But yeah, you want to hope that you move on, because life moves on, and that you achieve this life where it's pretty balanced. You know, you got that homeostasis, enjoy some of the finer things in life, and have that be enough, but sort of keep that equilibrium, keep it at the same level, general upward, largely positive trajectory, rather than those massive peaks and huge lows, and the stress of sort of living that life. I think that's a pattern that lots of us can fall into, even once we're fully fledged adults, where it gets to Friday night and you start the weekend by getting drunk, and then you wake up on Saturday and you feel pretty shit, and you do that most of the time, and the tone that sets, I'm pretty sure I would look back in 10 years and be like, yeah, I'm really happy I didn't do that much, or I certainly should have done that less. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. I mean, I'll answer the question and then I'll just ask a wrapping up question. I don't think I want to do more of anything right now. I think I've struck a balance. I'm working hard enough. I'm spending a lot of time with my family that I know other people aren't probably as privileged to have that situation where they just have to keep working. Like I've taken time off work to spend time with Yanni, like for 8 months. That's
Yeah.
just not
And
normal.
you've been able to do that because you grinded so hard for a long time to put yourself in the position to be able to do that. And the company that you work for is obviously awesome that they allow that. But you made that happen.
Yeah, to a point, and to do less of, it'd probably just be worrying or removing the stress or worrying less of everything will be fine. Like sometimes we get caught up of there's some metrics of I just need to pay that house down. There's a point of making it, and I think just within ourselves, there's so much we want to achieve, and we're inspired by so many people, and that will happen. I think in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, it'll be like we're gonna get there. Just soak it in, enjoy the moment. Just keep bringing me back to this moment, which is the best moment. Like I'm in a very unique point of life of there's only a very short amount of time where a baby is a baby and coming into a toddler. Like it's hard, but it's really hard. But this is a very unique time, and just coming back to that of the moment all the time. And
Life is happening now. It's happening now, and it won't ever happen again. Like this is
this is it. Like it sounds weird to say, like when Yanni was born, you see in the photos like a baby fits in your hand. Like you can hold a baby like that, and then in like 2 weeks you can't do that.
Yeah.
And then there's just these different things that's going to go so quick. And yeah, it'd be worrying less about the future and the things that I want to achieve. Yeah, I will still work hard at those things.
Yeah.
but they'll just happen.
Yeah, and I think that's a great attitude to have. And I have had men on the show towards being 40, and they talk about all the plans they had when they were 30, and that they might have ticked a lot of them off, and they slaved away, worked 14 hours a day for their family, and then it all fell apart, and then they realized wasn't present. I was never present. I might have been there, but I wasn't there because I was just thinking about what was next and all the things that I had to achieve, and that actually bit me in the ass. So yeah, temperance, balancing that, being able to be the go-getter, have the things you're trying to do, but also say life's happening now. Like it's slipping through our fingers right now.
Yeah, and just to put a loop on that, I think, and you responded to one of my podcasts, my solo podcast I did, of just not having it all, being able to have it all. And we see hyper success, but you can't just have that single thing. Like there's a sound bites of certain people, of Gary V, Elon Musk, and they've achieved hyper success.
Yeah.
But it's like you have to take
At what cost? You have to take the whole package, right?
Yeah.
Because it's what we look at certain examples of people, and we go, oh, I'd love to be them, or I'd love to have as much money as X, or I'd love to be as famous as that person, or I'd love to be as good at basketball as whoever it is. It's like, yeah, but do you want their whole life? Because you have to have their whole life. You got to have the whole package, and you can't just pick and choose. And understanding that some of the people that we might look up to for one particular element of their life, there's this whole other life that they're living that you might not want. And like someone like Elon Musk is the typical example of this, where he's boundlessly brilliant and a genius and is driving the human race forward in lots of ways. And lots of people would say, oh, I wish I could be like him and build rockets and microchips for the brain and Teslas and all of that. And then the other side of that is he describes his mind as a storm, and he can't switch it off. And he sort of neurotically, obsessively powers through life and can't ever have any respite from himself. And it's like, okay, would you actually want that life in order to have some of the things that person has? Would you be willing to sacrifice some of the things that you have that you might not even appreciate, that they don't have, because you want the shiny object that seems to be desirable, and thinking about all the things that we do have and the quality of that, and the fact that that's really important, rather than just hyper focusing on, as is easy to do, comparison and everything that I lack, and the fact that there's so much still missing and so much still to do. So I can't possibly enjoy and be content now. That has to be for later. And I think that's just the greatest trick of all.
Touche, brother. The podcast, Youngblood, where can we support, find you, share the stories? Yeah. How can we learn more about the stories and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so Youngblood Men's Mental Health on Instagram, Youngblood Mental Health on TikTok, because it was too long and they wouldn't let me have that many characters. The podcast is on YouTube and all podcast platforms. We do every episode in professional quality video, so you can watch them. And yeah, done a whole bunch of episodes with people from all walks of life, all different kinds of stories. So anyone who's listening, man or woman, regardless of how old you are, would be able to find stories that they can relate to. It can be a really good resource for people to better understand those in their lives and get some tips on how they might be able to approach certain situations. I've also been doing an expert series recently where I've branched out and I've been speaking to psychologists and researchers and authors for a bit more of an analytical approach to certain topics. So yeah, there's a whole lot there for people to have a look at and get something out of. So please go on, have a look and like and subscribe.
And you have to hit subscribe.
Yeah, that's right.
It's only when you get into the content making is like the subscribe really matters. Yeah. Like I know you watch my stuff. Like thank you for that, but you really got to hit the subscribe.
Yeah, it does. It does make a big difference, and also obviously rate it 5 stars and leave me comments and all that stuff.
And I just want to underscore the professionalism of this podcast. Like this is 2 guys hanging out in a room, but your studio that you do this at is top tier. It's like it's 5 out of 5, high quality production.
Yeah.
The stories, the effort, preparation you put into these stories is magnificent, and
Thanks,
I
man.
aspire to it. So I really thank you for the work that you do. You've been a good friend in the past and still are, but seeing your arc of growth and how you are a leader in this space is inspiring. It really is. And being able to hold that space, some of those conversations, I've cried in your podcast so many times, man. Just listening to them, I'm crying.
Wow.
Because
Yeah.
the stories are so powerful and you can resonate with certain things, and this man's holding that space. And that's you. So thank you. I'll be sure to share everything, tag you in a bunch of things. But I really urge people to check it out. It's really cool.
Thanks, bro. I appreciate that a lot. And yeah, you're a man who inspires me as well. So kudos to you. Hopefully I can be half the dad you are when the time comes.
Thanks, man. We'll have different sorts of fun when that happens.
Yeah, we'll have a different conversation in a few years.
Yeah, that's it. Down at the park.
Yeah, that's right.
Looking at other
with
dads.
the prams.
Yeah.
Oh, we can have those like aesthetic dad packs and
absolutely. And just you have just these pythons on your sets of arms for the dad. So
I'm looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to that arc too. So thank you again. Been really good fun. Thanks for your time.
Cheers.
Thanks, bro.